The war that everybody thought was over is actually just beginning. Casey is ready to walk away from East Camp forever, Miles has officially lost everything he worked for, and now someone is trying to assassinate Thomas Rainwater before the truth about Broken Rock is exposed. But after watching the brand new trailer for episode 13, I honestly think the season finale is hiding something much darker than we expected, because this doesn't look like a simple attack anymore. It looks like a full conspiracy. And by the end of this episode, one major character might not survive. The question is, who's really pulling the strings behind all of this? And can Casey stop this war before Montana completely falls apart? Episode 13 already feels different from every other episode this season, and honestly, you can feel that tension immediately in the trailer. The atmosphere feels darker, the characters seem more desperate, and for the first time, it genuinely feels like nobody is safe anymore. The title of the finale, Wolves at the Door, is already a huge warning about what's coming, because wolves don't attack unless they believe their target is weak. And after everything that happened in episode 12, Thomas Rainwater suddenly looks more vulnerable than ever before. As you remember, Thomas has been fighting against the mining project for a long time now. He knew that if the mine opened near Broken Rock, it would completely destroy the land, poison the water, and ruin the future of the people living there. But until now, most of this battle happened through politics, meetings, and negotiations. The danger stayed hidden behind closed doors. However, episode 13 changes everything, because now the people behind this operation are no longer hiding in the shadows. They are finally ready to attack openly. And honestly, that makes this finale terrifying. The biggest reason why the situation becomes so dangerous is because Miles is no longer officially part of the Marshals team. After his suspension in episode 12, Thomas lost one of his strongest allies. That is extremely important because Thomas was planning to use Miles as proof that Broken Rock deserved support and protection. Miles was supposed to become the face of justice in Thomas's campaign against the mine, but now that his badge and gun have been taken away, everything becomes unstable. And I honestly think the people supporting the mine immediately saw this as an opportunity. Because think about the timing for a second. The assassination attempt against Thomas happens right after Miles loses his position. That cannot be a coincidence. Whoever is behind these attacks clearly understands exactly when Thomas is weakest. And that tells me something very important. The people organizing this are powerful, connected, and probably much closer to the government than anybody realizes. What makes the trailer even more intense is the fact that Casey immediately puts himself in danger to protect Thomas. Even after everything Casey has already suffered this season, he still cannot walk away when innocent people are in danger. And honestly, that says everything about Casey's character. This man lost Monica. He lost Double G. He spent the entire season trying to survive emotionally while carrying responsibilities that never truly belonged to him. Yet every single time somebody needs help, Casey steps forward anyway. But I think episode 13 is finally going to push Casey to his absolute limit. Because protecting Thomas during a political attack is one thing. Surviving a militia assault is something completely different. The synopsis confirms that an armed militia attacks during the episode, and honestly, that changes the scale of the story completely. This is no longer about one corrupt businessman or one political disagreement. This is organized violence. And the scariest part is that militias usually don't move unless somebody powerful is supporting them from behind the scenes. That's why I think Casey is about to uncover something massive. The trailer keeps hinting that the conspiracy is larger than anyone imagined. And I honestly believe that line is the biggest clue in the entire promo. Because if the conspiracy were only about the mine, Casey probably would have understood it already. But the fact that he realizes the truth much later suggests that this situation connects to something even bigger. Maybe powerful investors are secretly funding the attacks. Maybe politicians inside Montana are helping cover everything up. Or maybe someone inside law enforcement has been leaking information this entire time. And if that's true, then Miles getting suspended suddenly becomes even more suspicious. Because what if removing Miles from the Marshals wasn't only punishment for his behavior? What if somebody wanted him out of the way before the attack against Thomas happened? Honestly, the more I think about it, the more possible that seems. Miles may have made emotional decisions recently, but he was also one of the few people willing to fight aggressively against corruption. Removing him from the operation at the exact moment Thomas becomes vulnerable feels way too convenient. At the same time, the emotional side of Casey's story continues getting more complicated as well. Earlier in the season, Casey kept holding on to East Camp because he believed it was his responsibility. Even after Monica's death, he stayed there because leaving almost felt like abandoning her memory. But after losing so many people, you can tell Casey is emotionally exhausted now. He doesn't look like a man fighting for a future anymore. He looks like somebody trying to survive the past. And honestly, that's why the idea of selling East Camp suddenly feels real now. When Tom approached Casey again about buying the ranch, Casey didn't reject the offer the way he did before. This time, he actually listened. And I think that moment was incredibly important because it showed that Casey may finally be ready to let go. Not because he stopped caring about East Camp, but because the pain connected to that place has become too heavy for him to carry anymore. But here's where things become emotional. I don't think Casey will be able to leave peacefully, because every single time he tries to move forward, another tragedy pulls him back into conflict again. And episode 13 might become the worst example of that yet. Imagine Casey preparing mentally for a new life while suddenly being forced into a violent war surrounding Thomas and Broken Rock. That kind of situation would emotionally destroy anybody. And honestly, I think the finale is setting Casey up for one final impossible choice. Does he finally walk away and save himself? Or does he sacrifice his future once again to protect the people around him? And unfortunately, I think Casey is going to choose sacrifice again. The reason I say that is because the trailer shows Casey standing directly beside Thomas during some of the most dangerous moments of the attack. Even though Casey could leave Montana behind at this point, he still stays and fights. That tells me he still feels responsible for protecting Broken Rock, even if he no longer has the strength to protect himself emotionally. And if the finale really wants to shock viewers, there is one heartbreaking possibility we need to talk about. I think either Thomas or Mo could die during the militia attack. Honestly, I don't want that to happen at all. But the signs are definitely there. Season finales usually change the direction of the story forever, and losing somebody close to Casey would absolutely accomplish that. Thomas has become one of the central figures in the political side of the series, while Mo has quietly become one of the strongest emotional supports around Broken Rock. Losing either one of them would completely devastate Casey and probably destroy any hope of peace moving forward. And if that happens, Casey selling East Camp may stop being a choice and become an emotional escape. Because after losing Monica, Double G, and then possibly Thomas or Mo too, I honestly don't know how Casey could continue carrying all this pain alone anymore. Now, honestly, we need to talk about Andrea because I think episode 13 could completely change her future forever. And after everything we've seen recently, it really feels like Andrea is standing in front of the biggest decision of her entire life. Does she leave Montana behind and start a new career in DC? Or does she stay near Casey and continue fighting beside the people she has slowly started caring about? And the more I think about it, the more I believe her choice is going to be emotional rather than professional. Because throughout this season, Andrea has changed a lot. At the beginning, she approached situations logically. She focused on her career, her responsibilities, and her future. But after spending time with Casey and seeing everything happening around Broken Rock, Andrea slowly became emotionally connected to this world. She stopped looking at Montana as a temporary assignment and started looking at it as home. And honestly, Casey is a huge reason for that transformation. The relationship between Casey and Andrea has been developing very carefully all season long. The writers never rushed it, which is why it feels believable now. Their connection isn't built on dramatic romance or sudden attraction. It's built on understanding pain. Andrea saw Casey during the worst moments of his life. She saw his grief after Monica's death. She saw him carrying responsibilities that were emotionally destroying him. And instead of running away from that pain, she stayed close to him. That matters more than people realize, because Casey doesn't easily let people into his life anymore. After losing Monica, he emotionally closed himself off from almost everybody around him. Most people only see Casey as strong, quiet, and dependable. But Andrea sees the exhausted version of him too. She sees how lonely he actually is underneath all that strength. And I honestly think Casey feels safer around Andrea because of that. But at the same time, the situation becomes much more complicated because of Dolly. Throughout recent episodes, it has become increasingly obvious that Dolly also has feelings for Casey. The difference is that Dolly represents something completely different from Andrea. Andrea represents a new beginning, a fresh start, a future outside the pain Casey has been carrying for years. But Dolly represents stability, family, and the life Casey already knows. And honestly, I think the finale is setting up a situation where Casey may be forced to emotionally choose between the past and the future. The scenes between Casey and Dolly in episode 12 already felt incredibly important. When they talked privately about East Camp, there was a different emotional energy between them. Dolly understands Casey in a quieter way. She knows what East Camp means to him emotionally. She understands the weight of the memories attached to that place. And unlike Andrea, Dolly has always been connected to that world naturally. That's why I think Casey feels comfortable around her. But comfort and love are not always the same thing. And honestly, I think the trailer keeps hinting that Casey's emotional connection with Andrea is becoming much stronger now. Especially because Andrea may be the one person truly encouraging Casey to imagine a completely different life for himself. Most people around Casey still connect him to responsibility, grief, and sacrifice. But Andrea seems to see something else in him. She sees the possibility of happiness. That's why her decision about DC is so important. Because if Andrea rejects the offer, it changes everything. Think about it for a second. Andrea worked extremely hard for her career. An opportunity in DC would normally be impossible to refuse. It represents power, success, and a completely different future. Walking away from that kind of opportunity would mean that something in Montana matters more to her emotionally than professional success. And honestly, I think that something is Casey. At the same time, the finale could also take a more painful direction. What if Andrea actually chooses to leave? Honestly, that possibility feels very real too. Because sometimes people walk away not because they stopped caring, but because staying hurts too much. Andrea may realize that Casey is still emotionally trapped by Monica's memory and the trauma surrounding East Camp. She may feel that no matter how close they become, Casey is still unable to fully move forward emotionally. And if that's true, Andrea leaving for DC could become one of the saddest moments of the finale. Especially because I don't think Casey would stop her. That's the heartbreaking thing about Casey's character. He loves people quietly. He sacrifices quietly. And sometimes he lets people walk away because he believes they deserve something better than the broken version of himself. So even if Casey has feelings for Andrea, I honestly don't think he would beg her to stay. Instead, he would probably convince himself that leaving is better for her future. And that would emotionally destroy viewers. But even if Andrea leaves temporarily, I still don't think her story with Casey is over. In fact, I think the writers may intentionally use distance to strengthen their connection moving into season 2. Imagine Andrea arriving in DC and slowly realizing that the job doesn't fulfill her emotionally anymore. Imagine her missing Montana, missing the Marshals, and most importantly, missing Casey. That kind of storyline would fit perfectly with the emotional tone this show loves to create, because Marshals constantly focuses on characters trying to escape emotional pain, but eventually realizing that their hearts remain connected to the people they left behind. And honestly, Casey and Andrea fit that theme perfectly. Meanwhile, another emotional storyline that could explode during the finale is Belle and Calvin's relationship. And honestly, I never expected these two characters to become this important emotionally by the end of the season. But after episode 12, it's obvious that their connection is becoming much deeper. When Calvin finally revealed his illness to Belle, it completely changed the emotional dynamic between them. For most of the season, Calvin tried to carry everything alone. He kept pretending he was fine even while emotionally and physically struggling. But Belle became the first person he truly trusted with the truth. And that trust changes everything. Because once characters start emotionally depending on each other in shows like this, relationships usually become much stronger very quickly. At the same time, Belle is also hiding something dangerous: her gambling debt. And honestly, I think the finale is finally going to expose that secret completely. The biggest reason why this storyline matters is because Belle's situation mirrors Calvin's emotionally. Both characters are carrying hidden pain. Both are trying to solve their problems alone. And both are terrified of becoming burdens to the people around them. That's exactly why they understand each other so well. I honestly think Calvin is going to offer to help Belle financially after learning the truth about her debt. Not because he wants control over her, but because Belle supported him emotionally when he needed someone most. And if Calvin really does pay off her debt, their relationship will become even more serious immediately. But there's also danger hidden inside that situation. Because problems like gambling debt don't disappear emotionally overnight. Even if Calvin helps Belle financially, the emotional consequences could still follow her into season 2. Her family could find out. People inside the Marshals department could lose trust in her. Or even worse, dangerous people connected to the debt could continue threatening her anyway. And honestly, the finale may only be the beginning of Belle's biggest problems. At the same time, though, I really think the writers are preparing Belle and Calvin to become one of the emotional centerpieces of season 2. Because unlike Casey and Andrea, whose relationship is filled with grief and uncertainty, Belle and Calvin represent something different. Healing. Two damaged people slowly helping each other survive. But honestly, while everybody is focused on the relationships and emotional decisions happening in the finale, I think the real danger of episode 13 is the conspiracy itself. Because the more clues the trailer gives us, the clearer it becomes that this attack against Thomas Rainwater is not random at all. Somebody planned this carefully. Somebody waited for the perfect moment to strike. And I think Casey is about to uncover a truth that changes everything we thought we knew about this season. The biggest clue is still the militia, because groups like that do not suddenly appear overnight. Militias need weapons, funding, information, and leadership. And most importantly, they need confidence. They only attack when they believe they are protected by powerful people behind the scenes. That's why I think the mine operation is connected to something far larger than simple business interests. Honestly, I think there are political figures involved. And if that turns out to be true, then Thomas has been in danger much longer than anyone realized. Throughout the season, Thomas kept warning people that Broken Rock was under threat, but most of the conflict stayed hidden behind political discussions and legal battles. The danger felt distant. Now suddenly, in the finale, armed men are openly attacking him. That kind of escalation only happens when powerful people become desperate. And that tells me one thing. Thomas was probably getting close to exposing something huge. Maybe he discovered secret deals connected to the mine. Maybe he found evidence that government officials were illegally supporting the operation. Or maybe the mining company itself has connections to violent groups willing to eliminate anybody standing in their way. Whatever the truth is, the finale clearly wants viewers to understand that this conspiracy reaches far beyond Broken Rock, and honestly, that makes the situation terrifying for Casey too. Because Casey has now placed himself directly in the middle of this war. The moment he chooses to protect Thomas during the assassination attempt, Casey stops being an outsider. He becomes part of the conflict completely. And considering how dangerous the militia already looks in the trailer, that decision could cost him everything. One thing I noticed in the promo is how exhausted Casey looks emotionally. This doesn't feel like the confident fighter we saw earlier in the season. He looks tired, angry, almost emotionally numb at certain moments. And honestly, I think that's intentional because the finale is trying to show us that Casey is reaching a breaking point. For years, Casey has carried everybody else's pain on his shoulders. He protected East Camp. He protected his family. He protected Broken Rock. He protected the Marshals. But who has actually protected Casey? The answer is nobody. And I think episode 13 is finally going to force Casey to confront that reality. Because no matter how strong somebody is, eventually, grief changes them. Losing Monica destroyed a huge part of Casey emotionally. Then losing Double G made everything even worse. And now, just as Casey starts considering the possibility of leaving East Camp behind and building a new future, another violent war drags him back in again. Honestly, it almost feels cruel at this point. That's why I believe the finale may end with Casey making the biggest decision of his life.